Have you ever wondered how a movie that almost never happened went on to change Hollywood forever? Most fans remember Terminator 2 for its incredible action, unforgettable characters, and groundbreaking visual effects. But behind every iconic scene is a story that even lifelong fans rarely hear. Today, we're uncovering 15 behind-the-scenes secrets that reveal how this film became one of the greatest action movies ever made, and why, more than 30 years later, it still feels just as unforgettable. Secret 15. The movie almost never happened. Looking back today, it's hard to believe that Terminator 2 came dangerously close to never being made at all. After the success of the original film, James Cameron no longer controlled the rights to the very story he had created, leaving the future of the franchise tied up in legal negotiations instead of movie studios. For years, there was simply no way to continue Sarah Connor's story until producers Mario Kassar and Carolco Pictures finally secured the rights, giving Cameron the chance to return to the world of Terminator. It's remarkable to think that one business decision quietly changed movie history, because without it, there would have been no T-1000, no Judgment Day, and no film that millions of us would eventually grow up watching with our families. Secret 14. Racing against an impossible deadline. Recovering the rights was only the beginning. By the time Cameron was finally able to start production, the schedule was already slipping away. Carolco wanted to introduce the project at the Cannes Film Festival, yet the screenplay still wasn't finished. Cameron and co-writer William Wisher spent weeks working almost without rest, rewriting scenes until the very last moment. Cameron later recalled handing the completed script to Arnold Schwarzenegger during the flight to France before finally getting the chance to sleep. One of the biggest blockbusters in movie history began under enormous pressure, proving that even legendary films are often built against impossible deadlines. Secret 13. Arnold helped save more than the movie. Most people remember Arnold Schwarzenegger for the leather jacket, the Harley-Davidson, and unforgettable lines like "Hasta la vista, baby." What many fans don't realize is that his greatest contribution happened long before the cameras started rolling. Arnold strongly supported bringing James Cameron back to the franchise and encouraged the producers to secure the rights that made the sequel possible. Once production began, he also embraced Cameron's bold decision to transform the Terminator from a relentless killer into an unlikely protector, giving audiences a hero they never expected to love. That creative choice solved one problem, but it immediately created another, because if Arnold was no longer the villain, Cameron now needed an entirely new kind of enemy, one that cinema had never seen before. Secret 12. The villain that had to wait for the future. Long before audiences met the T-1000, James Cameron had already imagined a villain made entirely of liquid metal. The idea excited him, but in 1984, the technology simply didn't exist, forcing him to set the character aside while making the original Terminator. Everything changed during the production of The Abyss, when new computer-generated effects convinced Cameron that the impossible had finally become achievable. Instead of compromising his vision, he had simply waited for technology to catch up with his imagination, and that patience gave birth to one of the most memorable villains in film history. Even so, extraordinary visual effects alone couldn't make the T-1000 believable. Cameron still needed an actor capable of convincing audiences they were watching something that wasn't human at all. Secret 11. How Robert Patrick became a machine. Robert Patrick never approached the T-1000 as a traditional movie villain. James Cameron wanted something far more unsettling, so Patrick trained himself to move with the precision of a machine, learning to run without appearing exhausted, breathing through his nose during long chase scenes, and even reducing the natural instinct to blink whenever possible. Cameron constantly reminded him that machines don't react the way humans do, and Patrick built his entire performance around that single idea. Decades later, the T-1000 still feels disturbingly believable, not because of visual effects alone, but because every movement suggested a machine that would never stop until its mission was complete. Secret 10. Sarah Connor didn't just look different. She had to feel different. The first time Sarah Connor appears in Terminator 2, you immediately know she isn't the frightened young waitress from the original film. That transformation wasn't created by makeup or clever camera angles. James Cameron wanted audiences to believe Sarah had spent years preparing for Judgment Day. So Linda Hamilton trained for months with military instructors, learning weapons handling, tactical movement, and intense physical conditioning until every movement became second nature. Years later, Hamilton admitted the training was physically exhausting. But she understood that Sarah Connor couldn't simply look stronger. She had to convince audiences she had survived years of fear, isolation, and preparation. The result wasn't just one of cinema's greatest female action heroes. It completely changed how action movies would write women for years to come. Secret 9. One of the movie's best special effects wasn't CGI at all. When people talk about the visual effects in Terminator 2, the liquid metal T-1000 usually gets all the attention. Yet one of the film's cleverest illusions came from something much simpler. Linda Hamilton had an identical twin sister, Leslie Hamilton Garrett, and James Cameron used the two sisters whenever practical filmmaking could create a more convincing result than computer graphics. Combined with carefully planned camera work and editing, the effect was so seamless that most audiences never realized they were watching two different people. It's a perfect example of why Terminator 2 still holds up today. The filmmakers never relied on technology just because it was available. They always chose whatever looked the most believable. Secret 8. John Connor was growing up while the movie was still being filmed. If you've ever felt that John Connor looked or sounded slightly different as the movie progressed, you weren't imagining it. Edward Furlong was only a teenager when filming began, and because production lasted for months, he started going through puberty before the cameras stopped rolling. His voice became noticeably deeper, his appearance slowly changed, and the editors had to work carefully in post-production to keep everything feeling consistent. Looking back now, it's almost poetic. While John Connor was beginning his journey toward becoming humanity's future leader, Edward Furlong was quietly leaving childhood behind in real life. Secret 7. One of the film's most emotional scenes came from real life. Miles Dyson's final moments feel painfully real, and there's a reason for that. Before filming Terminator 2, Joe Morton had suffered a collapsed lung, an experience that left him with vivid memories of struggling to breathe. Rather than simply acting Dyson's final scene, Morton drew upon those memories, recreating the exhaustion and determination he had experienced himself. Most audiences never knew the story behind the performance, but they could feel its honesty. It's a reminder that some of cinema's most unforgettable moments aren't created by visual effects at all. They come from actors bringing genuine pieces of their own lives to the screen. Secret 6. The scene that terrified an entire generation. Ask longtime fans about the most frightening moment in Terminator 2, and many won't mention the T-1000. They'll remember Sarah Connor standing in a quiet playground, watching children laugh just moments before a nuclear explosion turns everything to ash. James Cameron never intended that sequence to be an action scene. He wanted it to feel like a nightmare, reflecting the very real fear of nuclear war that millions of people lived with during the Cold War. That's why the scene still feels so unsettling today. It isn't frightening because of the special effects. It's frightening because for many people who watched it in 1991, it felt like something that could actually happen. That haunting vision of the future prepared audiences for an ending that almost looked completely different. And James Cameron came surprisingly close to leaving us with a very different final memory of Terminator 2. Secret 5. The ending you almost saw. Most fans know the ending that made it into theaters, but very few know James Cameron actually filmed a completely different one. In that version, an elderly Sarah Connor watches her grandson, playing in a peaceful future where Judgment Day never happened. It was a satisfying ending, yet Cameron felt it answered too many questions, so he made the difficult decision to remove it. By leaving the future uncertain, he allowed every audience to decide for themselves whether destiny can really be changed, a conversation that fans are still having more than 30 years later. Secret 4. A machine became the father John never had. For James Cameron, the real story of Terminator 2 was never about defeating the T-1000. It was about the unexpected bond between a lonely boy and a machine that slowly learned the value of human life. As John Connor teaches the Terminator compassion, responsibility, and even humor, the machine quietly becomes the father figure John has always needed. That's why the final moments of the film feel so personal. We aren't simply watching a mission come to an end. We're watching a family say goodbye. Secret 3. The thumbs up that made millions cry. When the Terminator slowly disappeared into the molten steel, audiences weren't saying goodbye to the ruthless machine from 1984 anymore. They were saying goodbye to a character who had earned their respect, their trust, and, unexpectedly, their affection. The famous thumbs up lasts only a moment, yet it has become one of the most unforgettable images in movie history because it says everything without another word. Sometimes the most powerful line in a film isn't spoken at all. Secret 2. Why this movie still feels personal. When you think back to Terminator 2, what's the very first thing that comes to mind? Maybe it was the first time you watched it on a worn-out VHS tape with your parents. Maybe it was quoting "Hasta la vista, baby" with your friends at school. Or maybe it was the moment you realized, for the very first time, that an action movie could actually make you emotional. That's what makes Terminator 2 so special. For many of us, it was never just another blockbuster. It became part of our childhood, part of our family memories, and part of the moments we still smile about whenever someone mentions the movie today. Without even realizing it, we weren't just watching Terminator 2. We were making memories that would stay with us for the rest of our lives. Secret 1. The greatest secret was never behind the camera. More than 30 years have passed, yet Terminator 2 still brings people back to a different time in their lives. The special effects were revolutionary, the performances became legendary, but perhaps the film's greatest achievement was something no one could have planned. It became a shared memory for an entire generation. Every time that familiar theme begins to play, we're reminded not only of the movie itself, but of where we were, who we watched it with, and how those moments quietly became part of our lives. If Terminator 2 was part of your childhood, I'd love to hear your story. Tell us who you watched it with, and which moment still stays with you today. And if there's another classic movie you'd like us to revisit, leave it in the comments. We'll see you in the next journey back through movie history.